coming up to camera 4, through to 4.
This is not a showcase. We're here for discovery. Move around, find out what information we need so that we can all start to sort of plan our futures going forward and understand timelines and roadmaps of where this kind of technology could lead us.
In any production, you have a rack of machines and you have control of those machines. This rack is just a little further away.
I think everybody understands the concept of cloud and what its potential is, but the opportunity we have this week while the Paris tournament is on is a significant number of days covering a significant number of tennis matches.
Enabling live production vendors to test live feeds in a totally virtualized environment.
So we brought one of our best television directors with us.
Camera 1 is the main angle that you normally view tennis from.
Replay.
I need to just find the right and the best angles for the director to take.
And the graphics.
And the graphics are being controlled from where?
Here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they can
trigger it from there.
What everyone's looking to do is to replicate what they're used to having on premises, to test would they still be able to create sport production with the same type of responsiveness that they're used to.
Camera 4, through to 4. One next.
We've partnered with AWS and ATP Media in order to facilitate the real end of where we can sit and monitor and control, and that's where Gravity have really put their expertise into play. And then the AWS team to build out the infrastructure upon which all of the manufacturers can then deploy their services running in that AWS world.
So from here, we're able to receive all the NDI signals. This multi-viewer now appears here in the PCR.
There's been so much talk about it. I think people are really ready to see with their own eyes what can be achieved. And I think also the people who developed these products have done so much recently that they're very keen to show how much progress has been achieved as well.
The months that we've had under COVID has been a real accelerator for change, because with COVID you couldn't travel, and even if you could, it wasn't a great idea to squeeze lots of people together in the back of a outside broadcast truck.
It's broadcast sort of entering into a whole new world. You know, we send a lot of kit, a lot of people onto site. It requires a lot of porta cabins, a lot of air conditioning, a lot of hotels. You can reduce all of that and virtualize that. It then doesn't really matter where you are in the world. Once that content is in something like AWS, you can get as many unilaterals around it.
So you just turn up and switch it on.
This is all about finding out what does work, finding out what doesn't work, and start to build, test, break, fix. And then our collective view on how we think things might need to change will give manufacturers the opportunity to take a collective voice to work on, to push this development to the kind of places that we feel it needs to go in order to satisfy what we do in live sport.
Being brave in your technology choices is an important part of being a trusted technical partner. What we want to find out is how brave can you be in the whole new world of virtualized production.
It's going to be a bit of a pivotal moment, I think, in sports production. We'll reflect back on this in a few years' time.
Hi, my name is Will Strauss. I'm one of the editors here at SVG. As you've just seen, we're going to be talking about a proof of concept done by ATP Media in Paris earlier this month. Joining me today are three of the main protagonists who worked on that project. David Sabine, who's Senior Broadcast Consultant for AWS, Shane Warden, ATP Media CTO, and Ed Tischler, Gravity Media Managing Director. Welcome to you all. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to come to you, Shane, first to set the scene a little bit if we can. Why were you doing this proof of concept?
For those of you who've known me before and maybe seen me on a Zoom panel or somewhere on stage, it's been a long-term ambition of mine to try and push the agenda of live virtualized production. And the opportunity came my way towards the end of this season, where I spotted that at our Paris tournament, we had a limited number of courts, yet a fairly hefty amount of bandwidth available for us. And the conversations that I've been having with the likes of Ed at Gravity and David within AWS, we came together with the idea that we could actually try a POC, but not just a standard POC. I mean, obviously, we're seeing a lot of people test live virtualization now, and that's been very heartwarming. but it has tended to be sort of with a single vendor on a single project of maybe a match or a kind of single one event type thing. And what I was really keen to do was trying to sort of widen that conversation out a bit more and understand the landscape in terms of how multiple vendors could start to interop in that sort of cloud environment. And also with the opportunity I had in Paris that we could effectively set up a 4-day continuous test across very long tennis days where we had up to sort of 7 matches a day, but spread over a 4-day period that became effectively not a demonstration, but a sandbox, really, a place to build and break and test and fail and discuss and collaborate and really start to sort of try and work out how these pieces of our jigsaw might come together for what could be a future of live virtualization.
Thanks very much. We mentioned the sandbox idea. David, who was involved in this sandbox and how easy or difficult was it to provide it?
Yeah, I think, the challenge that Shane set us was fascinating. I mean, we wanted to do both live video and audio mixing, a replay, data-driven graphics, post-production, and so on. So we had to look within a multi-vendor interop environment, the vendors that were familiar to ATP Media and had the tools for the job. So looking at the switching side of things, the mixing side of things, we used Grass Valley. Viz had a very strong relationship, not only in the switching, but also in the graphics and their relationship with Delta Tray for the data feeds for the graphics. Simply Live is a vendor that's well known with an all-in-one solution that includes some significant replay functionality. To give you an idea of some other vendors which were using more of a SaaS model, we looked to Grabio and Mavis to provide their solutions. And we use Sienna as well to provide the kind of NDI glue for routing between these various solutions.
Thanks very much. And Ed, what was the role that Gravity Media played?
I think our role was to sort of, really help Shane and David and AWS bring this to life. So I think we were quite clear from the start, albeit, conversations, as Shane said, had been going on for a long time. So it was very much about looking what happened in a media connect to media connect kind of world. But I suppose Gravity's involvement was the on-site piece and ensuring there was engineering support and getting the feeds into the encoding element, and then also building the production hub as per the requirements of individual vendors or anything Shane or AWS needed, and the kind of putting forward the model that would look very much how we would sit in a sort of virtualized production world.
Thanks very much. Right, let's get to the meat of the matter, shall we? Let's get to the really important stuff. What really worked, Shane? What things were you really impressed with? What was a success?
Just to put a bit of a bracket around this as well, Ed's just touched on it there. The big part of this test was, I sort of see our world in 3 worlds, effectively, of trying to 3 different challenges, if you like. There's the challenge of what we're doing at a contribution level. Okay, how we do things on site, all of the things that surround transport streams and codecs and latency in that travel to get into a cloud environment like AWS. And I compartmentalize that as an entirely different project and problem that we all ultimately need to solve. And there's a lot of people working really hard on it, and we'll get there at some point. The bit, as Ed said, is the bit between Media Connect and Media Connect, because the tail end of that obviously is the distribution piece. And I think we're much further down the road in terms of our levels of sophistication in managing that and coming up with systems and processes for that. So this bit was the bit in the middle. And I think one of the big successes for me was just the fact that the manufacturers could interop. There was and there was a lot of goodwill and collaboration involved in creating that interoperability. For one of the things that I thought was probably quite essential was the capability of where NDI came into play. We used a combination of NDI and CDI, and David will talk a bit more about that, I'm sure. But using a protocol like NDI across the board to help with that interop was really quite important, and gave us the opportunity then that the the real learnings was about how the gluing of these interop partners could work together. And that's where the Sienna product came into play. That sort of became very much a Swiss Army knife for us in terms of how things can be connected together, but also how you can effectively deploy that glue in very quick, very intuitive, very graphical ways effectively into a world, but also use it as a probing environment to effectively, in almost a traditional way too, actually probe and see real pictures along the way across your network and across all your systems and services. Because I was really, keen to understand, the level of intensity that we might have to apply in different forms of processing within instances. It was all built within a single instance by the AWS team. And to understand how each of those processes were being hit by what we were trying to achieve. But, we had, 15, 16 cameras all arriving at a business, which you have to remember as well, we were off net, right? This wasn't a place that was served by our global fiber network that we have with Tata around the world. This was a standard business building. Very nice, thank you, Ed. But nevertheless, it was a standard business building with a single 1 gig business grade internet coming into it. That Ed's business was actually trying to do its day-to-day business around us while we were bringing in and creating and running 2 different PCRs, cutting effectively the same cameras, but pretending to be 2 different courts, if you like. And successfully doing it too as well without stressing out any of that connectivity. So trying to see what we could do in that off-net world was also a real achievement for us too.
Thank you. David, on that same point, from your perspective, what do you think worked really well?
Yeah, I think, as Shane said, the deployment was relatively straightforward. The majority of the solutions were deployed within the same VPC. We used Media Connect effectively to connect the feeds coming up from the venue and fan them out both into the VPC where the vendor solutions were deployed, and then also add into the Grabio and Mavis world. And we also use Media Connect as well then to provide entitlements back out to other parties that wanted to receive the outputs. So I think all of that was fantastic. I think it's also important, we're technology people on the call here, but it's also important to think about the production operators as well, because it's great that we had a technical success, but it's also was very important to look at how did this appear from the operational perspective. And so between Gravity Media and ATP Media, we had freelance crew, director and replay operators and so on. And I think that's essential. You want people that are out there doing these live productions every day to come in and assess what they can see in this PCR. And I think one of the biggest compliments we got in terms of the PCR environment was that these professional operators were able to sit there and do their day job in front of this PCR, albeit connected to a virtualized back end, and not notice any difference from what they would expect if they were sitting in their traditional world. And I think that was true across graphics, replay, monitoring, audio, vision mixing, and I think that was outstanding. Clearly we had a fairly compressed time frame to get all this together. We didn't actually have live feeds coming up from the ground until 48 hours, or actually close to 24 hours before the event. So of course there was some tinkering behind the scenes over the days to get around a couple of unexpected things. But the fact that every single day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the operators were able to sit there and produce a tennis show, I found that very rewarding.
Edward, do you agree with that then, that your operators found that actually pretty similar to a normal production?
I was gonna get on the back of that anyway. I think that for me, there were several eye-opening experiences over those 4 days, but just seeing how familiar that front end was for production teams, I think was fantastic, because we all know the challenges that come with migrating production, across different technologies and hardwares and interfaces and GUIs. But when you see very familiar panels and modules, the production are working in front of, you think, gosh, this transition is going to be a lot easier. It made a huge difference, I think. Shane, don't you?
I do, and the other part of it as well for me was the simplicity by which the that back end, how it flowed into the post-production workflow, because now we had our feeds arriving in AWS and we were writing into storage within AWS. The deployment of our Adobe Premiere Pro was simple, and using the Nice TV RDP interface on AWS made it absolutely fluid. And I even me as a rusty old editor, if you like, but very quickly I was getting a very acceptable performance out of the way I was editing. And the beauty of it was I had all my ISOs there with me. These are all growing files that I was able to work off, and that was very liberating in a world where a lot of these elements are starting to become separated a bit remotely, and we've got challenges as to how many of these feeds and things you can really access. So I was delighted with that too.
I think also just watching, for example, the director setting up his replay transition, or positioning a picture-in-picture on the panel, or mapping his cameras and replay sources into the panel. I mean, the experience was exactly the same as it would have been if that panel was talking to a frame, in the next room, and similarly for replay. And yeah, I think that is a real credit to the outcome.
Thank you. So we've talked about some of the things that we were impressed by. What areas do we still have some work that needs to be done, Shane? Which parts of the workflow perhaps still need a bit of development?
I think, it almost sounds obvious, but it was quite profound. What we tried to do, what I was really keen to do, is obviously I had teams on site, creating a real production and managing contribution feeds and distribution feeds going out around the world. And Paris is a relatively difficult TV compound to work within because it's very, very small. And so we couldn't deploy a ton of people and a ton of kit, and so also with factors like the Paris labor laws as to how many people you can have on site at any one time and when people need to switch over, we really wanted to try and just do a kind of set and forget setup there, and deploy our current, what we call our PBUs, our portable broadcast units, which are managing the encoding and the delivery into the fiber as pretty much untouched as our standard contribution methods would be, that we would do our remote production from. And that caused us a bit of a challenge, I have to say, because one of the real takeaways was the absolute importance of getting timing signals within the feeds that are coming. And with cascading problems of the PTS timing signals that caused different vendors different sorts of problems, but it was good for everybody to sit around and discuss just how these things can impact them and what steps they're taking in worlds that for instance, because what I'm trying to do here is also look at how these systems can be deployed, not only across that sort of tier one, this is the masters bit, but what we do in the 500s and then what we do on the 250s. So, across in tennis, we're quite lucky that we have many different sort of layers of our sport that represent all those things, from the lower league tier sports, which are much more challenged in how they work and how they're funded and those things, versus the very top tier, and how this kind of technology can be deployed across all of them and still be meaningful in terms of giving them advantages. So I found that timing aspect of it was an important takeaway. What we tried to do was deploy super slow as well, but the discovery there really is that if you're going to do that, there are vendors that are working on this an awful lot at the moment, because it's very much a given that we need it in sport. But my reluctance to add any additional hardware on site meant that was a part of the test that we had to park, in the knowledge that will be something that we can do. And the fact we can ingest all of the other feeds as replays and turn them around and use them just gave me heart that once we sorted out the elements of the timing, we would be fine again on that front too. I don't know if you have any more to add, David, on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think, you touched on a very interesting point there, Shane. I mean, we've been waiting for the bandwidth from venues to the cloud to get to a point where we can start to put large numbers of signals up those pipes. And now we're looking at the challenges of keeping all of those feeds synchronized. And definitely when you've got, 3 times or 6 times 6 phases coming off a camera, being able to keep those phase aligned is a critical aspect. So yeah, there's definitely things that we can, learning we can take from this as we move forward. The way that timecode is inserted into the feeds and potentially stripped out or passed through, depending on the configuration of the various infrastructure in the path. And those are all important aspects. I think I learned that monitoring on the network side, both the wide area and the local area, would be something I would do differently in the next POC. So certainly it would be nice to be able to have more metrics. We were using for example, the Elemental Media Connect metrics going into CloudWatch and other metrics to keep an eye on the system. But I think next time I'd like a little bit more granularity there. And similarly on the PCR side of things, when you have all of these vendor solutions plugged into a 10 gig switch in Ed's facility there, it would be great to be able to look at the traffic going through the switch. But those are all things we can take on to the next POC.
Thank you very much. Ed, from your point of view, what did you learn from this project, or what are you learning from this project?
I mean, I would echo the sentiments of David and Shane there in terms of what could be better. I think what we learned as a technical provider was just how far forward some of this technology was. I wasn't expecting some of the capacity, especially on the vision switching side, to be as advanced as it is. So I think, it was a real eye-opener, and definitely stuff there that we're going to follow up on. I think it's caused us to expedite some of the decisions internally in terms of what we can achieve for our clients, moving forward. So, yeah, I think it was a question of learning very quickly just how much further down the road this is than we thought as a business. So, yeah, it was a good education from that point of view.
And I think there was one other aspect to this as well, seeing the likes of, given the fact we had, freelance professionals who do our tennis. I mean, we literally pulled one of our best tennis directors out of doing the Paris event and put him on this POC. And what was wonderful to see was his direct interaction with the vendors themselves. And when they were sort of starting to discuss, well, our next development is going to be to do this or do this. And he would say, well, I'm not entirely sure that's the right way to approach it, because when I work, I do this. And the same for the replay guys as well. And I think that was really valuable for the vendors themselves to have that direct contact. And in the middle of day 1, day 2, day 3, match 1, match 5, match 7, there were just plenty of opportunities for everybody to take a step back and stand and talk, and then go back in and discuss the whys and wherefores of it. And I think that was hugely beneficial for everybody all round.
Thank you. Just to bring this sort of to a close, if we can, Shane, what else needs to happen, and what's the next steps?
So, yeah, I mean, the next step for us, this was super important for us at ATP Media as we start to look forward to the future. We as a business have been doing remote production for our international feeds and edits for probably 5 years now on our 500s, and relatively recently, because of the pandemic, on our masters at a bigger scale as well. And we're looking forward really in the future as to how we modify what we do. And then the steps for me is in talking to my production team is to start to give them that education, that comfort that how much further away is it that we could be deploying this kind of technology in a virtualized cloud environment that then liberates them to have the people wherever they need to have them, whether it's on site, whether it's in a remote London hub, for instance, or a different hub, maybe in the States, or even that sort of emergency scattered around, from business premises that weren't necessarily designed to be a PCR at the time, but we've had to separate people in order to achieve TX still. So, it gives me and hopefully, we invited quite a few of my peers across the other, other sports properties to come and collaborate too, because that was part of this for me, that I really believe a sort of collective investment by all of us in thinking and feedback and direction that we can give to the vendors and the likes of the AWS team will help even people like, Ed on his service provision side start to create and plan their own investments going forward over the next sort of 2, 3, 5 years, so that we can all pivot our businesses effectively at the same time, but with the same level of confidence that we're on the right road for the right reason. and having that collective consensus and direction, I think, is going to be key to that, and really beneficial for everybody, no matter where you are in that top tier or the other tiers within our sports media world.